Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome once again to another Monday evening episode of To an Imperfect Union, brought to you by the political consciousness of West Coast Steeler fan. Uh, as you can see, James E. King 3, that's who I am on Facebook. You can check out my various pages there at West Coast Steeler fan, our Twitter handle, as well as the Sports Crib. And James E. King, $ J.E. King 3 is our Cash App. Please, if you're on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you care to donate, thank you very much. We appreciate it. All proceeds go to uh, further broadcast of the uh, network. So, with that being said, um, I once again went and looked at 3 videos, and I was really uh, trying to relate these particular videos, especially this first one, which was taken almost 60 years ago. Almost 60 years ago. And this was an interview given by Malcolm X. And this is Malcolm X. This is Malcolm X before he went to Mecca. And I'd like to make a deference to pre-Mecca Malcolm and post-Mecca Malcolm. This particular interview was taken in 1963. Now, in 1963, I was just 16 years old. As a matter of fact, let me pull up this particular interview. Okay. Now, let me give you a little background on this. This was Malcolm X at the University of Berkeley in October 1963. Okay. I was a 16-year-old kid at in 1963. As a matter of fact, I just ran away from home in September. So I was actually living in Newark, New Jersey at this particular time. And we'd see the brothers out there with the newspapers and the bean pies, and saying, "Come on, brother, come on to the mosque." And of course, 16 years old out there in the street, wild as hell. I had no idea of what was actually going on in my country. Okay, at 16 years old, I probably had no business knowing what was going on in my country. But when you compare the amount of news media that I was exposed to at that particular time, as opposed to what the average 16-year-old today is exposed to. You wonder if you can blame a lot of this on technology, as we have talked about. Uh, but to go a little further into this interview, Okay. uh, as I was saying, at this particular stage of my life, I'm a 16-year-old kid, more involved in uh, high school girls and uh, illegal activities, trying to be cool. I'm wild. I'm wilding out here. You see, to me, the winds of change, as far as taking responsibility for your kids, started right around this time. I would dare say we had as many gangs in 1963 until 19 at least 65 uh, as we do now. A lot of these gangs actually have their roots back in the 60s, especially when it comes to the Latino and some of the other uh, 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 ga- gang activities. Because it was also a matter of your not just your survival, but it was also where you bonded with one another. Maybe at this particular time, and I'm speaking of Newark, New Jersey in particular, you had a lot of kids whose parents were working. You had a lot of kids whose parents were hustling back during those days, especially in the inner cities. Look up the record of Mayor Hugh Adonisio in the black community during this time. And we didn't want someone preaching at us. Now, it took me sitting my behind down, being incarcerated before I was able to read and understand what Malcolm was saying. And that was cool for those people that believed in it. But I'm about trying to stack paper and trying to get my hustle on. And whereas I enjoy bean pies, I'm not going to the mosque on Sunday morning or any other evening for that matter. So a lot of the principles of what Malcolm was saying was lost on the youth. We had to be smacked around and come back to it during the war. And as I've said before, there was a very um, direct method of dealing with gang activity back in these days, especially 2 years old, 2 years later, 1965 and on. Because if you were a member of a gang, or if you were someone that was on the uh, local police radar, you were due for a trip down to your army recruiter. And usually it was the army or the navy or the marines, because especially the marines back in our day, well, and the army too. You didn't have to be that intelligent to pass the test. It was fairly elementary, and in some cases, your parole officer and your parents could just sign you in, and that would be the end of that. They didn't realize what they were going to have to deal with when we came back, but this was the present solution to the problem. We'll go a little bit further into this Malcolm X interview here. Let me see. This is about the 17-minute mark. Let me see here. Good evening, Dr. Casey, and how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself? You out here just breathing?
Oh, no, I was actually playing back the video from Malcolm that I had sent everyone from 1964, and
Mhm.
I had just,
Okay.
I had just, I had just left. I had just ran away from home like a month before in September of 1963. I was just 16 years old, but I was kind of comparing what Malcolm was saying in 1963 because as you know, I'm one of those pessimists that I really don't see uh, the progress that's been made over the last 60 years because this I mean it'll be 60 years next October, and it, I see us treading water because I see the same arguments, I see the same rhetoric that I have seen since 1947. And as we've all said before, the thing that makes it much different is the access to news and social media that the
Mhm.
average 16-year-old has today that the average 16-year-old didn't have in 1963. Now, when we came back, in droves from Vietnam, it was quite, things had changed quite a bit. But before that, we weren't in. I mean, I saw the guy there with the bow tie and the newspaper. You know, we might put our little money together and get a bean pie, but we wasn't going to no mosque. I mean, we was going and chase the girls and try to find a few nickels and dimes at the pool hall or whatever. And we had as many gangs in 1963 as you do today. The only difference is that we didn't have access to AK-47s, but as far as
Right.
the concept and why you joined a gang or why you gravitated toward a gang, these problems are still here today. Things haven't changed.
I agree to an extent. Now I agree that things haven't changed from that time period till now, but I do see the ability to for more change to be seen in the future because of the amount of information with technology.
But we've also talked about technology being a curse as well as a blessing because of how fast technology moves. And I mean, the average 16-year-old kid can play Call of Duty, but he can't read a classic.
That isn't all the way always true. Just
It's not.
because
It's
people are
not
playing
go ahead.
just because people are playing video games don't mean that they aren't also getting educated as well.
But the numbers point to that also. When you look at the
But what numbers are you
graduation,
going off of?
I'm going
Because
okay. Yeah,
it's a lot of people that don't graduate. I didn't graduate high school in a true sense. It's a lot of don't wait, but still intellectual. They're still able to pick up and read a book. They're still able to do more than what a lot of the older generation was able to do with even less education than what these people got now. The people that's millionaire, the people that is running these big Fortune 500 companies are not always high school and college graduates.
oh no, no, no. I mean, one another part of being a good CEO or a good boss or whatever is also being able to select, the people around you. I mean that goes into it too. So even though it might be Dr. Casey, there's also a staff that usually that takes some of the responsibility or specializes in this or specializes in that. So I mean, in those instances, yes, we have come far, but the same we're still asking for a voting act in 2023.
Y'all generation are the people that really are asking for the same things that didn't work. Our generation are is kind of moving in a different direction.
But it's our generation, and I keep pointing this out. Except this year, I think we have our first Gen Z. Now we have some people that are supposedly the face of the Democratic Party that are in their 50s, but 12 years from now, they're still going to be in their 60s and 70s, you know. And I mean, why aren't there e- more people your age that are the face of change rather than kind of,
There are people
and
my age that's the face of change.
name one.
Ti, Killer Mike, um, those are just two people off the top of my head. David Banner, Ice Cube. It's a large number of people that cover my age spectrum. That is younger than your age spectrum, and baby boomers that have become the face of leadership. It's just how are they taken as leaders? It's a lot of people that are up in leadership roles that are by the generation and mainstream media as a whole.
Oh, but here's my drift. Okay, and I recognize those names that that you're talking about, but there just seems to be so much, you know, and this is definitely the fault of my generation because
This is a great display of what I just said. Then when you bring up those leaders' names, you're saying, yeah, but so they're leaders, but they're not good enough.
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that whereas they may appeal to me, when you start talking about my generation and you start talking about Miss Sims or Miss Scott or people that are involved in
They don't
politics,
have to appeal to you.
but we are still the age group that is in power right now. We are
They
still sending
don't.
seven.
The
We are still
y'all,
sending 70 and 80-year olds to Congress. We're not sending 40-year olds, except for this one Gen Z guy. We're not sending 30-year olds to
that's
Congress.
not true.
We're sending people old as hell to Congress.
We are not sending 70 and 80 to Congress. Stop. The people that are in Congress now that are that old are people that have already been in Congress. They ain't get voted
And
out because
and
it ain't
and
nobody there
and
to replace them
they're
yet.
just getting brand new 6-year terms.
They are not
It's
new
just
people. They are, but they are
Arizona,
not
Ari-
new people. They are incumbent people.
right?
They are, these are
And
you're not talking about people that are new people. You're talking about people in office that people comfortable with staying in positions, but don't act like AOC isn't younger. Don't
no,
act like some of these people that's getting elected now aren't younger. There's a lot of younger people being elected. However,
and
if the
and
older
we
people are
put
staying in those
labels on
seats,
it,
and that doesn't give the opportunity for
and we're
if the
putting
older
labels
people
on
stay
them.
in
Go
those,
ahead.
they don't give for younger people to come and get elected. As long as they want to hold on to seats and try to stay in those seats, then nobody else can get elected. David Scott is one of them. He got it's 3, 4 people that was in the primary going against him. You know what? He don't want to give up that 175,000.
Well, and that's another thing. See, it's not about the money, because how do you
It
without going to
clearly
jail?
is.
Well, look. we know that when these people get in Congress, all of a sudden you take a salary of $175,000 a year and you take it and you make it into a 6 or 8 figure fortune. It's not about the money. It's all about the influence and it's all about the power. That's what it's all about. And and I'm just trying to figure out how your generation is going to wrestle that power out of the power hungry hands of us
We don't have
old
to wrestle it
fogies.
out of y'all hands. Y'all dying. Yeah, yeah. Eventually, y'all will not be here no more. Do that. All we have to do is wait for the time and the opportunity for those seats to come available, and they will come. I've been talking about this for years, but there are also people still stepping up to be in those leadership positions. But I would also like to know that there are a lot of people that don't want to be in those elected official positions because it limits your ability to do a whole lot of things that you can do when you're not in those positions that you can address and talk about not being in a position versus being in a position that is limited.
How do you feel that those positions are limited?
What you mean?
And,
It's a lot of things that you can address once you become a elected official. There are some things that are completely off the table to be addressed in conversation. There are some things that are completely off the table to be addressed in a movement and how you do things and why you do things and who you can politic with and who you can talk to before that will jeopardize your whole career in politician as a politician. It's a lot of things that you cannot do when you are an elected official. That if you are not an official, you can have conversations and you can move around a little bit different.
but can you okay, so how do we get this particular message out? Or how once again, how do we cut through the power hungry political consciousness and become a collective community, or is this an impossible goal?
No, I think that you are just looking at it incorrectly. The same way, kind of when Miss Sims, sometimes she think that we attack her when we say that she isn't when she isn't like fully engaged in the conversation at this moment and what's going on now and kind of out of touch. If you guys aren't really tuned in to my generation's train of thought, past the movements that's going on within the structure of building now, then you'll keep having the assumption that nothing is being done. And it's not that nothing is being done, it's just being done in a way that you can't conceptualize it being completed. So if you can't understand how things are going on and what's going on because it's not done in a way that you can physically be a part of. And for many of the older generation, they think that, oh well, y'all must not be doing that. Y'all just like the thought process that you had earlier. Y'all just online wasting time doing nothing. And it's a lot of um social gathering and a lot of ideal um and think groups going on that you guys don't understand how it's happening. So the concept and the belief on a lot of the older generation is that nothing is going on. If y'all don't see no march, if y'all don't see no picket signs, if y'all don't see things that you're used to seeing, you think nothing is being done. And it's just the concept is changed. The method and the approach to getting things done is not the same that it used to be. And it doesn't need to be because nothing changed doing it the old way.
Now that now you see why I'm bringing up these old videos from the '60s and the '70s where we're explaining. Oh, okay, I see you shaking your head. Go ahead. I saw you shaking your
I
head.
don't agree. I think that yeah, because I think that we have a continuous cycle conversation about what y'all didn't teach us or what didn't happen and why isn't it happening now versus being more solution based and saying, okay, here are the things that didn't work at one point. Okay, so what are we going to do to make them work? And not ending the conversation one week and then having the same conversation again the following week, but actually picking saying, okay, now how can we extend the thoughts from last week to something new this week? Because it seems like a recycled of what the old people didn't teach us or what the older people didn't do and how the older people's methods didn't work. Okay, we've talked about how it didn't work. But because it's hard for y'all to see, based on the conversations that we're having, that the younger generation has already turned it up a notch, has already made some changes that would rectify a lot of things that the older generation couldn't solidify.
Okay, see now I would be all right with that if there was okay. Explain uh, how your generation and I kind of consider myself very progressive. I go on a lot of what I call progressive websites, and I try to see exactly what the I would say 40 to 60 age group is doing now, but I try to concentrate more on what the 28 to 40-year-old group is doing now. And the reason why I keep addressing the same things is because every election, every election, and it might not be Donald Trump per se, but we keep going through the same things. We keep sending the same people back to the same positions up until I think what was it this year the first year that we have sent a completely democratic government to Arizona. Uh, how many years have we had the same leaders running for the same positions, not just on a national level, but on a local level? I'm sure you have some city councilmen that have been there longer than I have, than I've been living. I'm sure that you have some politicians my age that have well look at your governor, look at your
Longer
lieutenant
than you've
governor.
been living.
Well, what I'm saying is why aren't we seeing if there's a change, why aren't we seeing younger people taking charge of these older positions? Why is the base of power still in the collective?
Where
Uh,
don't you see that at? I don't understand because you keep saying if it's changing. Do you think that you're supposed to see all new faces in one year, 2 years, 3 years? Because normally change doesn't happen in an instant.
how,
Change happens over
how
time.
long has Lindsey Graham been in Congress?
Lindsay is not that old. Lindsay ain't in his 80s.
He's in his 60s. He's in his late 60s, early 70s,
He
and
is
he pro-
not.
and he
You said 70
and
to
he and
80.
he projects a stigmatism back from my generation. You're going to tell me that Lindsey Graham is the face of
There are people
progressiveness?
that are 50 years old that projects that same mindset. That
Yes.
that you again, you are missing what I'm saying when I say that change is not it's you're tomorrow you're not going to wake up and see 20 new Congress and senators. That's not the way it works. This year you got about 5 or 6 new ones. A couple years ago you got a few. It's going to be a trickled effect because you have to train you're not just throwing people in those positions just in those positions.
All
Because
right.
at the
Well,
rate that
let's.
you're going, the rate that you're speaking that change should happen is that tomorrow we need to just volunteer a certain number of people that's going to get into those positions that one are not only qualified but able to lead in stride with what's going on, because the things that you're going to get when you actually get in those positions is not the same thing that you see when you're talking about city leaders that's around urban neighborhoods and urban communities. It's not a 1, 2, 3 thing. It's almost like if you look at the person Twitter, that didn't happen overnight. That took several months. A lot of big mergers and companies that have to be redone, even if you buy it within 6 months to a year. Do you know how long it takes for the transition for that company to transition to the new leader and adjust to new leaders? That does not happen overnight. Leadership in true fashion and form, it takes time for leaders to be born, raised, and brought up in a way to where they can actually change and not just get in a position and doing the same the person that was there before you was doing. Anybody can go and do the same exact thing and be like a puppy mill or like a cattle mill, but we're talking about substantial leadership that actually brings about change. And I believe that we are seeing a gradual change of leadership.
Well, I want to go back to this conversation in 2024 after the new elections and see if you still feel the same way. Um, because you know, I want change. I would much rather see you or someone in your generation in charge than see someone, and even you have talked about Smokey, Sleepy Joe, and Trump and these people. But on the other hand, when I look at
I wouldn't want to be in a leadership position like that because I don't believe that I would be able to be as effective in an elected role.
okay. Well, so we all. I mean, I respect your viewpoint in the sense that you don't want to be out there in the face, but you want to be part of. And these are things that I think that are very important. Uh, but speaking of progressive, and everyone knows how I feel about religion, so I'm going to go on to my second video. And this is about the gentleman that thinks that it would be okay for the church to raise weed on its land, and he also thinks that it would help bring uh, a certain audience at least back to the church, um, and maybe there'll be some good that'll come out of this. Now, God knows, hey, I've been smoking weed a long time, enjoyed my weed. And when I looked at this on the outside, I'm saying, well, is this absurd? Or is this something that can be turned into good? Now, my radical ass says, hey, I'm all for it. It does not mean that the church has to condone you getting high. It doesn't mean that everybody in the church has to smoke weed. But if it gives your church a viable source of income where they're not preying upon the congregation, I kind of see nothing wrong with this idea, at least on paper. Now, when we start getting down into crooks and all that, but on paper, it does not sound like a bad idea. It sounds very progressive. And I mean, as long as it's a legitimate business, should it make a difference?
If that's his church and that's how he gonna run it, then it kind of is what it is for me. It doesn't move me either way. It's a business. It's plenty of other people that got the same type of business. It's just a business that would make people uncomfortable. But if you can get people off the street that already want to sell weed and they can do it legally, then I mean you got to do whatever you feel like you got to do. I guess. I
Well,
don't really have nothing negative to say about it. I don't have anything either way to say about it. I don't know what God told that man.
uh, okay. I mean, maybe it was a message from God. I'm like I said, I'm looking at it from a business point of view. But it was just a thought, that in I mean, out here in California, I'm not sure is weed legal in Georgia?
There are some aspects of it that is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, hey, like I said, there are some things that a business to me is just a business, and it doesn't make a lot of difference to me as long as it's legal and it's serving the community. Now, the third thing, the third video that I put up had to do with James Baldwin, and he was talking about how uh, in order for him to uh, alleviate his fears as a black man in America, he felt much safer being abroad. What do you think about that concept when you start, when you hear people talking about separation, such as the Muslims, or or you hear about uh, 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 integration? What's your thoughts on uh, I guess black fear versus white fear?
I mean, I think that segregation would have made us stronger as a culture because it would have left us without the need to seek white approval. To feel like we have to do whatever we can to sell out whoever we can in order to fit in. However, being integrated has not been the worst thing. uh, I don't know if there will ever be a happy medium to it. I think that, for those that want to be segregated, I think that there should be a portion of land up specifically for them. And I think there should be another portion of land for everybody that's cool with being around with, whoever they want to be around. Um, because there are some people that are gonna always be extremists when it comes to diversity, and then there are some people that are always going to be more open minded, and there's nothing that you can really do to change the way that something has been engraved into a person's mind on how to see life. The only thing that changes that is exposure, but it depends on what you're willing to be open and exposed to in order to be able to get a new understanding of living.
So, do you think that when you talk about segregation versus integration, Do you think that that is also a family choice or a community choice?
It's it's an individual choice. Um, and I say it's an individual choice more than a family choice because there are families that, some families don't like any other race. Yet and still they may raise somebody that is interested in dating, being with, or around somebody of a race that their family members don't like. And you can't force your beliefs on the next person. When you do, that's when hate is the root of your emotional pull.
So, do you think that we are more of a hate based society than a kumbaya society?
I think that it's a more of a fear-based society, and because people operate in the spirit of fear, it veers away from love, and fear makes for you to become hateful. Fear makes for you to be more nervous and anxious and all the other things. So that now, instead of just being fearful of an interaction, now you have it's like you build up a wall and a barrier against whatever it is that you fear, and that becomes hate and disdain because of not being able to understand, but a lot of that is because you're not being exposed to it, which adds on to your fear.
But fear is something that our society is based on. Is it your society or the modern society built on freedom, especially freedom of expression?
The world is built on fear. The media is built on fear. Everything that we see is a fear-based mindset and concept because fear is easier to control. So if I tell you all the bad stuff and I tell you everything that's sad, I tell you everything, all the more of a pessimistic mindset things, then it'll put you in a state of fear. I'm scared to go outside. I'm scared to interact with people. I'm scared to do this. I'm scared to do that. And that makes you begin to hate, and it makes you begin to become anxious. And that's what makes people move in their ego versus in their vulnerability.
So, how does your generation address that? Whereas my generation seems to be comfortable in living in fear, fear of young people,
Our
fear of
generation don't take no shit. They have
we said
a different approach to it. Go ahead.
no, no. I was listening. You said you said you have a different approach. I was listening for the approach.
The different approaches, we address things head on. It's a lot of things that the older generation won't talk about. They scared to discuss in depth. They don't come with solutions. It's just a whole bunch of repeated rhetoric that they've learned and heard, and they continue to repeat. Versus my generations following me are looking up information and they're coming with facts and knowledge based solutions that gradually changes the concept of what's seen, learned, and understood.
So, is there ever going to be a meeting of the generations, or is it always going to be a constant conflict?
I don't think it's a constant conflict. I think that the older generation that's willing to hear and grow with where the younger generation is placed right now, then they are able to communicate and integrate the knowledge from older times to the current times. And then wherever it's a divide, it's just a matter of a lot older generations and younger generations have a hard concept of communication where we trying to say something and then y'all generation is more so um not open to listening, hearing, and really understanding where the new generation has come from because in y'all mind the only way that's right is the way that's been done, although not much has changed in those things. I don't
So do
like
you
every time whenever you talk about how it's the older generation versus the new generation, I have communication.
you were coming in and out there? We couldn't get all of that.
I said I don't see that there is a divide. I see that there's a lack of communication.
So do we set up? I mean, are there ambassadorships? Because right now it seems like we're a house divided. Because right now we have these older people in charge. You have probably the oldest two men in history that are going to run for president in 2024, and uh, the vice presidential candidates on either side really aren't uh, the most uh, I don't know what to say about. I mean, but my point being is, when can we come together as I said, as a collective, and decide that instead of dividing between the young and the old, we find that common ground, such as the solution in the George Floyd square thing. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter where he's from. Injustice is injustice. But once again, you have a group of people my age that are afraid to go and talk to a group of people your age. Does that go back to that fear-based thing that you were talking about?
I think it's a problem of communication. The
So I,
the problem is the amount of the ability to communicate. If your people are not open to listening, then it doesn't matter. But like I think what they do with where George Floyd was killed is neither here nor there. That's not something that's big in my book. Like that's just them deciding to do something in that one community. That doesn't speak for the whole country. It doesn't even speak for their whole state. That speaks for that small community.
but the collective idea of black people being killed by policemen, isn't that an overall view? That's not just one particular
That
community.
but the George Floyd Memorial space has nothing to do with the collective of people being killed by the
No, no, no,
police.
no,
Because
no.
it's not just black people getting killed by the police.
No, but what I'm saying is that there has to be somewhere where you start. There has to be a beginning where we can all say, well, hey, maybe if we start here, we can expand from there. And I mean, it's Breonna Taylor. It's not just George Floyd. Like you said, it's not, and it's just not exactly.
I've never heard anybody debate about what's gonna happen to where Breonna Taylor was killed, or any other person that has been killed. There has never been a debate or a congregate of people coming together to figure out how to memorialize somebody being killed. I think that it's overkill. That does not mean that crime is going to stop or go one way or another, or even that the area is going to change. It's just like MLK Drive in most places is dead smack in the middle of bullcrap and violence. So that doesn't make it something that's going to be sacred ground because it's not sacred ground.
It was something about it's not sacred ground, and then you froze up after that. Not sure what's happening. It might be technical difficulties on our end. But uh, I would like to find. And Brother Williams said that he'd be on a little bit later. He was his son. He had to take his son to the hospital. But rather than draw a line in the sand, I would like to think that there is a common ground um, where we can use our resources and bring about effectual change. And I mean effectual change in our voting laws, in our discussion, and let me go back and okay. I would like to think that there's to use the old adage, I would like to think that there's a bridge over troubled waters. And by that I mean the constant bickering between our generation and the younger generation. There has to be a time when we find mutual understanding. And this hasn't just happened to this particular generation, but I can remember it happening when I was growing up. And I was thinking about, why was it so important for my grandmother and my grandfather and everybody in the family to go and vote? And then one day when I was being nibby, as the old folks used to call it, I heard one of these conversations and how so and so wasn't able to vote, how they whooped so and so, how such and such happened. And it reminded me of how important it was for their generation to vote. And I've said many times the thing that I was hurt the most by of my own doing was when I found out that I would not be allowed to vote because it had been instilled upon me by listening to the people that I loved and respected. Now, is it the fact that we do not respect our elders? Is that what it is? Have we gone away from that concept of taking a village to raise a child? Because the average parent now, hey, how dare you say something to my kid? If you got a problem with my kid, you come and tell me. Okay. Grandma and them did the same thing too. If you got a problem, you come and tell me. after you make sure such and such, But I would like, and I've talked to some of the young people out here, and some of the things that they do, as we pointed out earlier, some of the ways that they uh, boycott or sabotage some of these right ring uh, rallies out here in California. So I do understand that particular concept. Uh, but I do think that there has to be a meeting of the minds. And I think that we're going to have to rely on more neighborhood groups and networking in order for us to become more united. Because it seems to me that it's much easier for us to come together on uh, a platform like Zoom in or Zoom meetings or Restream or even a platform like this one. It does seem that it's much easier for people to talk on platforms like this than it is for us to talk in a town square type of meeting or a town square type of setting. So, um, maybe it does seems like we keep rehashing the same things over and over. But once again, when I look at the last election, even though the Democrats gained 2 Senate seats, uh, when you look at what has happened, uh, Sinema has come out and said that she's an independent. Uh, Her declaring she's an independent is to me the same as Joe Manchin declaring that he's a Democrat. You can say what you want out of your mouth, but it just doesn't compete. I mean, when you look at your voting record, it says something else. Um, and a lot of these people that do not want to certify our elections aren't necessarily people my age. They're people that are younger. They're people that are in their 40s, excuse me, in their early 50s, and whom are saying that the democratic process uh, has been tainted uh, due to election fraud. But they have no trouble contesting the elections in which they win. Selective amnesia would be a good way to describe the right. But also in keeping with the bridge, the question of these bridges, and how do we come to a collective agreement within ourselves. There is strength in numbers, is not a foreign concept. Look at what has happened around the various elections around the country. Look at January 6th. And January 6th, I think, was a direct correlation between the insecurity of the majority and not about democracy. Now, has democracy ever been a friend of black people? Of course it has. Democracy should be the key, the saving grace to the black community. Instead, we have let democracy be defined for us by others, not by our community, not by the things that are important or are meaningful to future generations of young black men and women, but by what the majority has decided that we need to know or we need to learn. If you were in grade school in 19, I want to say, let's see, 1953 until 1962, book bannings and book burnings were things that were done by foreign entities, by dictators, by people that we considered anti-democracy. When you look at the agenda of the educational agendas of Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, even some of what we consider Midwestern states, Nebraska, South Dakota, uh, bastions of democracy, as we once called them, Pennsylvania, Ohio, banning books, things that are tolerated in 2020 would have certainly been looked at in a different manner uh, back in the day. So I'm not saying that change is not on the horizon. My question is, How far has the horizon been pushed back? And are we victims of our own egos in thinking that we have passed down this wisdom and knowledge to future generations, and the only thing that we have managed to do is further divide a nation? My my seeming excuse me here. My seemingly my seeming inference that excuse me, I have to get my uh, excuse me here. Uh, okay, my seeming inference that as long as things continue this way is uh, that there will be a vast schism between the two generations, and uh, I want to say that town halls, small group meetings, uh, maybe neighborhood groups, as you see a lot of these social media uh, 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 platforms are dividing up into now. You have groups, you have places like Facebook, where you see all types of different conversations. Sometimes go in and listen to another person's point of view. You might find some completely absurd. You might find some, that you agree with. The thing that I'm urging is participation, and I think that's what we all need. We just want participation. We want our voices to be heard. Dr. Casey, I see that I see that you are back. I'm Brother Williams told me that he was going to be on there in a minute. Like that look today, that little militant hat and whatnot. I had to get my little dig in, but glad to see you back. But so, what do you think are the things that we should be discussing between the generations, and how to uh, uh, form a coalition for the better good of all?
I don't know if it's a generational thing that should be discussed versus a just a solution based mindset in general, cuz we can pick apart all the things that hadn't been done right, or the differences of what's seen versus what's unseen, who's the leaders versus who should be the leaders. But what are the solution based conversations that we can have, that if somebody picked up this podcast and listened to it today, that they would be able to take actionable steps to see something change versus the great debate on what's not working.
Are there some particular solutions or situations that solution based examples that you could show us?
I mean, the one of the biggest things is the mindset of there being a divide. As long as we talk about the great divide and the uh the lack thereof when it comes to being able to have conversations and hold conversations, it will continue to be a divide. So it's really more about just taking a different approach to the conversations that are being had. There's a way to where you can talk about the things that Malcolm X said, or you could talk about Jamal Bryant in a way to where it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this aspect of gardening and cultivating something, then what other things can be done that would expand the the draw and the reach of the church in general versus a conversation that is slated to judge or make a judgment based uh opinion based comment on something that we really have no control of. You know what I mean? It's different to say, okay, so if he's doing this, what other things can be done that would help enrich the community in a way that allows people to do what they're familiar with, and to be introduced to some things that they may not be familiar with that would expand the territory on believers versus non-believers. Because when I listened to that interview, that portion of the interview was like less than 60 seconds, but the rest of the interview and his goal to bring in people that haven't been saved their whole lives, people that hadn't that may not have ever been introduced to the church, and creating a space where everybody's welcome. That's a whole different conversation than just hanging on the sound bite of him saying that he's looking for people that smell like weed. He really just saying, if this appeals to a different demographic, the demographic that we need to tap into, that we need to heal and build with, then let's stop allowing a negative narrative to scare people away, and let's invite these people into a space and place where they can feel accepted and be able to use those same skills in within the church house that would allow them to be productive citizens versus criminals.
I never thought I brought that aspect into it. I thought I brought in the aspect of business and how it would enhance the church and take the financial responsibility away from the congregation.
But that wasn't even the mindset. His conversation about it was not really based on the financial
So
profit of the culture of weed at that point. His
no, but
whole
you'd have to listen to the video in order to get that part. That was
that's what I
that.
just said, that the video was a lot more than that 15 seconds of him saying that he wanted to cultivate weed. That was not even the bulk of the video. The bulk
uh,
of the video was far broader than the small couple of seconds that he talked about trying to draw in people who were in the weed culture.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't really taken in a positive light, which was the reason why I wanted to bring a different aspect into it because as soon as you think weed, then there is another certain connotation. But greeting, Brother Williams. You're on mute.
Oh, oh yeah,
There
all
you go.
power to people.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. I'm good.
Uh, we were having a conversation about generational, I guess. Well, Dr. Casey, can you kind of fill Brother Williams in on what you were talking about as far as the positive conversation versus the negative conversations between the two generations?
Well, I think that with just a brief synopsis of the conversation, Mr. Williams would be able to grasp uh, the overall, because this is something that we talk about often, is that there's a reoccurring conversation that has more of a negative context on the divide between the older generation and the younger generation. And my particular view is that it's not, let's back away from pitting one generation against the other, because really, when James continuously says that the younger generation isn't doing one thing, or the older generation isn't doing one thing, it's really that they're both doing different things, but nobody is communicating about what's being done. So
Okay.
I think that's the gist of it. I spoke about it being more of a fear-based narrative that is going around. And James, of course, is talking about how the older leaders, why the older leaders keep getting put back in office, and I'm trying to explain to James that it takes time for leadership to change, evolve, and develop into something new. And a lot of those old seats have to be given up. Mostly, they're going to be given up not because of retirement, but because people are dying out of those spots, and those spots have to be filled because of that. Not because these people are not giving up that easy 175
Right.
k yearly. They're not giving that up easy. That's easy money.
Yeah,
And with insider trading tips, you're not giving that up.
and what I'm saying is that my generation has constantly bombarded the older generation with the things that have been important to us and not to the growth of our community. In other words, what I'm saying is that I think that even though you know uh, Dr. Casey is wanting a solution based answer, in 65 years we haven't found one. I said the same people that I voted for as a 30-year old, I'm voting for as a 75-year old. So I'm saying, how long does it take for change to come?
All right. Let me add another backdrop to this story. Um, and I like to use this from a podcast that I was on last night. Um, when we talk about, especially now that we're talking about politicians, let's just go back into when they were first came in office. If we're talking about the older generation, the the culture, and I'm gonna use that word probably often tonight. The culture of politics has has changed, but in a sense, what got people into office or what the drive was back then when they came into office is has not changed in terms of the way the political climate is now. For example, when we talk about let's just isolate this to the black community in our position on politics. When us as a people fought to end segregation, us as a people fought for civil rights, us as a people fought to be in an environment that is conducive to being included or inclusive to us in our well-being. The further you get away from segregation, the different the environment is in terms of seeing the benefit of operating as an individual as opposed to pushing it as a collective isolation for black people per se. So the deal is the older politicians look at it from the standpoint of what's right for black people is the same thing that's right for white people. And from that standpoint, if I can fix the problem that affects us as a people from a political standpoint, then even by just looking at it from a trickle down effect, it will also affect the black community. That old political narrative, I feel, is still the kind of the mentality that you take on from a political standpoint when you go from a segregated operating in a segregated society, being what I refer to as assimilated, knowing that you only can represent a small piece of the situation, but yet you want to be the representative for a collective of people, but you're going into an environment that you have to cater to everybody, and it's the majority that you have to win over. So from that standpoint, how do you get elected when you push the narrative of a minority, but expect to be elected by a majority? So you pick and choose your battles, and you pick and choose how you want to go about just advertising yourself as a politician staying in office, like from the standpoint of talking about career politicians. So I have to give and take as a politician playing a game of politics. I have to be liked on both sides, and I can't go too far on one side with all agendas that affect black people, and not also be on this other side that affect the agendas of the representative majority. And so a politician mentality go that goes into that from the old school is not necessarily transformed with a younger generation. So I will use the same thing I talk about when you talk about the Panther culture or a lot of organizations that have been grassroots organizations that have been around for a long time. How do you attract younger people into the movement when the same condition or the conditions that drove you into it are not necessarily viewed the same way? How do you bring in fresh people with a fresh set of perspectives that are also able to connect with the older ones? So, in other words, how do you deal with the traditions, the older traditions and the newer traditions, and merging them together? Just like how I would say within the Panther culture, I would say the same thing had to be in the political arena culture. Those black politicians that are already in office have to be willing to usher in the next generation of politicians, as opposed to the younger politicians fighting to replace them and they're not willing to give up their seat. How do you make the baton pass off? The people that are already in political power, the people that are already in that arena that knows how this operate, have to be willing to usher in the next generation. So it has to be something that's dealt with on both sides. It's not just the people that are voting; it's the politicians themselves as well. And the best example I can give you here in San Diego is Shirley Weber and what she did with her daughter. You see what I'm saying? You created a path for the younger generation to be able to come step in and also do the work. Now, how many of our black politicians are reaching back to try to help younger politicians get in office, as opposed to just making sure they lock themselves in place?
See that's what I'm trying to understand here, brother Williams. When you speak of passing the baton, you're speaking of a relay race. You're speaking of a concept where you know that you have to get the baton off to your next running mate,
Yeah.
and it's a consistent passing of the baton. But what happens when somebody don't want to pass the baton? What about? Wait a minute, I'll run this leg too, and the next one. You, you know,
Well,
uh,
that's how we end up with a gap in our generations. I don't care whether we talk about politics, we talk about any particular system, to where we're trying to make a difference in trying to deal with that system staying alive within the hands of our people. if we don't work to actually bring in and actually grab the next generation and bring them up. And that means giving them the knowledge that we got, giving them the inside track and say, hey, this is how this is done. Let me hear out what you feel like you have to offer, and let me tell you how things have been done. If we're not doing that in any arena within the youth and connecting that, then what we're not doing is looking at the bigger picture. In other words, the race that we're dealing with, whether we talk about the human race or we talk about race in particular, like African race or black people, if I am not raising the next generation to be able to take my place, then I am doing a disservice and injustice not only to myself but to our people. It's no different than practicing what we go into within the trifecta of our household. Everybody as a parent attempts, if I'm not mistaken, will attempt to raise a children based upon the knowledge and wisdom that they've gained throughout their life. And so, therefore, that child has a chance and hopefully a better chance to not have to actually make the same mistakes that I made because I'm going to teach that child based upon the experiences that I had and guide them. So, why do we not want to have that same example when we talk about building a family or building a community? Why is it any different? Why? That's why we emphasize to some degree the concept of tribal. I don't mean to try to say it in a negative connotation, but what I'm saying here is what separates us as an individual in terms of what we do to raise a family and a community. We've disconnected ourselves from that those two being one. And as a result of that, it becomes what we call a rat race. And when it's a rat race, then it's every man and woman for themselves. I'm gonna hoard and hide the knowledge that I've obtained and the lessons I've learned. And by damn it, I want you to fall on flat on your face, even though I know everything I can do to keep you from doing so. And that is some arrogant mess that will plague our ability to enhance the next generation in a political arena. So what are we really doing at that point in time? Are we being crabs in a barrel?
That's the way I've described it. But
Well, I say we as a people have to help hold those those people in political office accountable for that. The same thing we supposed to be doing at home, we supposed to be doing in the community. We have to raise each other. We have to help the next generation in all capacities. And if our politicians are unwilling to do it, then we have to call them out on it. And maybe that in itself becomes the revolutionary change that needs to happen, which is I think is unfortunate if it has to go to that extreme. Casey, you quiet over there. What you got?
I believe that that is happening now. Is there is a lot of leaders that have been in place being challenged and being made uncomfortable by the generations that are coming up in age and quote unquote rank now. But I also believe that the leaders that are in place, those that are trying to lead, those that are trying to pass down information, those that are trying to kind of hand walk people from, we're at a point to where we got to hand walk people from the streets in order to be in positions of leadership. And that is not was what I was telling James earlier. That's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. That is something that it takes time for people to transition from one aspect of leadership to a whole different type of aspect of leadership. And when you play in politics, this is where a lot of people would prefer not to be elected officials because they can't move the way that you can when you're a non-elected official. James, I don't know if he really gets the concept when I say that you have more room to do more things when you're not in that type of a seat versus when you're in a seat and the magnifying glass is on you, and it's like they waiting for that sun to hit you with it so that every time you do something that they don't like, they put that sun through that magnifying glass and say, we can't do that. You can't say that. You can't do this. Versus when you're not in that position and you're just ushering people to be in that position instead of you, it gives you a little bit more room to uh, evolve and help others evolve.
That's true. But that's how that. But to me, that still ties back to the public people, the public officials having a powerful team behind them that 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 has a sincerity of actually helping the people in moving that and making that happen. So yeah, I agree. If that's what's happening as well, or should be happening, so we need to hit it from both angles.
Right.
I just think that we have to be more than ushers. I think we have to be a part. I mean, are you going to be a deacon? Are you going to be a trustee? Are you going to be an usher? I mean, I, I understand that everybody has a place, but how far down the food chain do you go before you're just another face?
Well, in trying to answer that question, and I assume you're using the word usher outside of the context of of religion, but
Right.
using that example. Uh, from that context, I mean, to me, it goes back to the system that is in place that we as a people are utilizing to get to actually put somebody in a position of power. So from that standpoint, now we have to go back to when we talk about a specific black politician that is in office, what type of team is behind that person and got them to the position of being in office, and is that team uh predominantly made up of our people, or is that team made up of a whole, predominantly of white people, and they just got a black face. So we got to talk about that part of it. If we're talking about an actual predominantly black team for the sake of putting a black person in a position, for the sake of helping other black people get in position, like how the most I would say other cultures do it outside of the African American community, because you got to keep in mind that the same thing I'm talking about in terms of an intact family typically applies to other cultures, as they tend to help their people get to levels of power. They tend to help their people establish businesses. They tend to help their people build up an economic base. They tend to help their families do so. In other words, you're going to have multiple generations all living under the same household. But when you look at the average African American household, we don't tend to do that as nearly as often as other cultures. And as a result, that also plays out to me in the political arena. Because again, whatever we do at home within our family structure is going to affect how we operate from a community environment. So if we don't believe in letting our grandparents our, and our children stay in the same household until they 20 in their late 20s, just so they can go all the way through college, build up a powerful nest egg, and then send them out, and then also be willing to have our grandparents in there helping out with the raising of our children, that we're bearing and we're operating, and then also have some uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews that are trying to get over here to the United States, or trying to get in a better position in this particular neighborhood. And we saying, hey, come move in with me. I'm going to help you get on your feet. I'm going to help you get employed. And then I'm going to help you get your first house so that you can do the same thing. You see, they're doing that type of cultural connection also in the political arena. So we have to look at how we live our lives in our personal household, and we can see how some of it is tore down in terms of our approach to politics.
See, that was the reason, the purpose for putting on the YouTube video of Malcolm X 60 years ago, because it seems like we still had the same arguments, we still had the same, we're bogged down in the same political beliefs, and what I would like to see is that we move on from that culture, and the baton is truly passed on. I do not see where the baton is passed on when I got an 80-year-old and a 78-year-old as a potential running for president next year or in 2 years. I'm just saying that maybe it's because I was a sprinter, but hey, I'm just saying like 60 years is a marathon, and I'm kind of tired of running. You know,
Hmm.
I want to walk a little bit. I want to be able to sit back and tell stories like the elders used to do, and pass on my knowledge. I don't want to constantly fight and bicker in order to get a seat at the table.
Well, that to me means you have to be willing to train your replacement. That's one of the things that we talk about within the Panther Party. But you know why we talk about that? Because of the lessons of COINTELPRO that we learned from when they target the head, the body will fall. In order to prevent that type of an easy target, we have to jump into this with the position that we're going to be targeted. So the first thing I better do is hurry up and start working on passing this information that I got to the next generation, so it makes me less of a target because there's more of me. So
Yeah,
out of
so
the
many leaders if
necessity,
you don't know who the leader is.
yeah, so out of the necessity of surviving within an environment of resistance, this is how we approach that. But that ain't the same game that we play when it comes to politics, because we're still looking at it from the position of individuals either being propped up or individuals wanting to maintain and hold on to certain elements of power. And I can even use the same video that you just brought up that you sent us in regards to Malcolm X. Remember, that video was shot before Malcolm X fell out of favor with Elijah Muhammad.
Right.
That video was shot before he went to Mecca and experienced a larger perspective and point of view on a worldview, which changed his dynamic in terms of just isolating things down the way he did. And at that point, he became more of a target. And at that point, he fell out of favor and stopped putting his faith in another man on that level. You see, and then it was too late, in terms of what was being done to him before he could build up a good enough capacity to find a replacement. But you can definitely see later on that he realized that his life was very limited on this planet. But at that point, him having younger children, not knowing who he can trust, coming out of a system that basically put one person in this ultimate seat and everybody else fall, is suppressed down by the wayside. From that standpoint, what that's the system he was taught. And then, to me, the modern day version of Malcolm would be Khalid Abdul Muhammad. Khalid Abdul Muhammad fell to the same fate. So you got to be careful about not looking at things from the position of training your replacement and building a culture of leadership. And I think that's part of the issue that we got. When we went from segregation to uh what you can people want to call it, what do you want to call it, integration or assimilation? The point being, did we make that transition with power, or did we make that transition with opportunity, individual opportunity? Because if we walk from one side of the table or one side of the fence to the next with a power base, then I think the political positions that we're talking about now would be totally different, because we would have had power within our communities. And when we talk about segregation, the only difference would have been is that we opened up the borders, but we still stayed within our sectors and we stayed concentrated, and we recognized that we will build up our communities and create all black Wall Streets as black communities, instead of leaving those communities in order to have some of us to have a better way of life and letting everybody else suffer, and then want to come back at some point in time and help out the hood. But yet you're not willing to be a part of that. It's no different than a police officer able to obviously enforce and police a community that they don't live in. It is way easier for you to not have an attachment that creates a level of accountability that you must have if you really want to see change.
Go ahead, Dr. Casey.
I think that one of our biggest flaws is the game is to be sold, not to be told,
Mm.
concept of thinking, because then you can't create sound leaders when you're trying to sell the information versus trying to teach and inspire through the things that you've actually learned. It becomes a consumer based mindset versus an actual evolution based mindset, and that's what really kills the potential of growth to the highest level.
A- And to me, James, and this kind of goes back into what I said 2 shows ago. I think that's part of the pimp culture. I
Mm.
think that's part of the pimp culture. The idea here is in order for me to maintain the luxury and be the baddest pimp on the block, I got to keep my stuff, on lock and not let you know what the real is. And if you want some of this, then you got to pay for it.
Mhm.
And I think we basically made a street transition with that mentality and just moved into the pulpit and moved into the political arena. It to me it just carried. But it's about that individual, it's that mindset that moved into those arenas.
So, as Dr. Casey was saying, how do we get to this from this individual mindset to a collective mindset when all of your technology points toward individual achievement?
I look at it no different than I look at a lot of other struggles that happen typically across the world in environments, which are to me are unfortunate, but sometimes it takes that. I think things got to get better. I mean, worse before people recognize we have to pull together and actually do something. I think it becomes an element of survival that is forced upon people to make change. And I really see us being in that scenario. So when you talk about how now, when you look at from a presidential standpoint, no winnable solution, maybe on the other side of that, there will be a winnable solution because it forces people to not be able to look at this one person or looking at one position as the answer. But now you have to delegate some of that leadership down to your own household, your own environment, your own situation. So it forces people to have to be a little bit more responsible and accountable for their own well-being, which goes into self-determination. So you creating a situation where the collective is forced to have to do things and make change, and then that will ultimately work its way up through the system as well. So again, going looking forward ahead in terms of the timeline, if it does become to where it takes that to happen, and we are forced into some type of situation of not necessarily the same level of segregation that we dealt with back then, but we're forced into some type of situation to where we have to work together again. When the tables turn and we have another opportunity to revisit seats of power, are we going to step to those situations with power? Or are we going to disperse and disband once again? Are we going to learn from the lessons of the past? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes again? That's the
Dr.
question to me.
Dr. Casey, the last time that happened, America elected Donald Trump.
Sometimes it takes for something crazy to happen in order for a revolution to actually take place. You cannot get a revolution to take place if you're doing what's comfortable for people.
Yeah.
So if you keep doing cycling what's comfortable, then nobody is never going to be a significant enough motivation to really see change. But when something happens that makes everyone uncomfortable, change will occur.
Uh, Dr. Casey, What do you think would be one of the bricks toward building the road toward that solution that you're talking about? I understand that the road's not going to be built all at once, but what do you think? Where do you think we have to put that first keystone down?
It's just really a matter of communication and conversation. As long as it, like I said earlier, as long as it's seen as a divide, and long as it's seen as though that there is no commonality between um the portions of information that needs to be shared, then it will always consistently be there. But when we decide to just have conversations that can shift the mindset, then we'll see a greater amount of change. But until we're able to just talk about stuff, the same way that we're talking about things here and now is the same type of conversation that presses the change button, presses the evolve button. But as long as it's not just having the conversation, it's the direction of the conversation as well. Because you can have a conversation that goes in circles and keep going in a circle and nobody is getting anywhere, or you can have a conversation with bullet points that addresses the different narratives, because you have levels and layers to the conversation that need to be had. Then within the levels you have the narratives, you have the mindsets, you have the misconceptions, you have the projections of information and feelings and all of those things that have to be kind of shuffled through in order to get us to a place that will allow us to see change. But having a conversation about um, how we are raising up our children and our families, and the willingness to not just sacrifice but also be humble about whatever sacrifice needs to happen. A lot of times we're dealing with people that have too much pride, and like Mr. Williams said, holding on to information is often because of pride, because you don't think that nobody can run the ball like you don't think that nobody can get those things done if it's not you getting it done. And unless you show somebody how to do it, and allow them to develop their own concept of leadership, you can tell them everything that you've done, everything that you've experienced, but they still have to do how it works for them. They can't do leadership how it works for you. They have to figure out, okay, if this is the playbook, how do I make this playbook work for me? How do I fit into the narrative and change how things are done so that we can go further than it's ever been? And that takes a level of conversation, communication, and humility, in which that you're willing to, one, learn from somebody else, but two, uh, be willing to sacrifice your lessons, because a lot of people, they can't teach nobody else anything because they're not willing to say, okay, this is what failed, this is what I did, this is what did not work. They trying to act like everything that they're doing worked. So as long as you keep putting on this facade that everything is going in the right direction, you can never make the corrective steps so that you can go a step further.
Brother Williams, is it time to get back to grassroots organizations like the Panthers, and maybe trying to deal uh, better within our neighborhoods and within our community, rather than trying to address things nationally when we haven't cleaned up our own backyards?
Well, I would say there's never a time to not be grassroots. I think the position that I think we need to approach it from is a holistic point of view. I don't think you need to be polarized. So, in other words, you only do one or do the other. The problem is, I think there's not enough people willing to sacrifice their levels of comfort to just simply be involved in it from any angle. So to me, it's not about just being Panthers. It's not about just doing it on the national level. It's about the amount of participation that we have, percentage wise and statistically speaking, we don't have enough of our people that are willing to sacrifice their comfort time for the next person. In other words, they're stuck in this isolation of where if it ain't happening, if whatever's happening outside of my door, I don't really care to be a part of it until my baby end up getting attacked by the cops. Now I want to get involved because now I have a personal interest. And I think that's the problem is that we're so disconnected as a family unit from a culture perspective, which is why I go back to that if it don't happen to our immediate family, then we don't see the value in getting involved in that thing. We'll go to, so that's why I would say our involvement in religious organizations are way more higher than it would be in dealing with politics or dealing with something that has to do with just human rights and addressing humanity, because the whole thing with that is the fear factor that is projected a lot of times in religion in terms of the whole heaven aspect has us looking to that as the answer as opposed to being able to address change here and now on this planet. In other words, we buy into the thing that this is the devil's dominion, and from that standpoint ain't a damn thing we can expect out of his territory but sin and destruction. So we buy into that as an acceptance of the environment that we're going to live on this physical plane, and that the only true answer is to get to heaven. And so that to me is a backwards mentality, and that mentality causes us to not have stake into what's going on here because we feel like it's not it's a losing battle because this should not be our real fight. And then you get those people that say the fight is spiritual from that standpoint, and then that gets warped into not fighting from the tools that we have on this plane and on this level. And I even go into the statistics that was released here recently in regards to there was in 2021, they said it was over 7,000 hate crimes that was committed. And of that, percentage wise, 31% were catered toward what was hate crimes against black people. And now if you were to try to break down that ratio in terms of a population, we can all agree that African Americans and Africans do not make up 30% of the United States. So to have 30% of the hate crimes happening to us shows to me that there's not enough of us involved. Not enough of us involved. And so we definitely need to be able to see that what's happening around the corner is going to be happening a few doors down. Eventually, the next door down, eventually, it's going to knock on my door. And so, if I want to have the right mentality, which is what we call preventative, preventative and preemptive uh, perspectives and address it in terms of solutions, then we need to get involved now. Why are you going to wait? That's just no different than your doctor telling you if you don't change your diet, you're going to get cancer. Am I going to wait until I go for that visit that doctor say I got cancer to want to make a change? Or am I going to recognize the fact that it's creeping on my doorstep? And if I don't take action now, is going to affect me. It's going to eventually affect my household. So how long are we going to keep our head in the sand as a population and know that we have no choice but to get involved? And to me, that's the accountability that when we talk about the Panther Party and grassroots from that perspective is pushing right now, is that time out for you not to be involved in the betterment of your community, the betterment of what's going on for our people, the betterment for what's going on for the planet, because humanity right now is on a crash course to causing the planet to rid itself of us collectively. So if we don't do things now, then there may be no future for none of us, yet alone black people. None of us. And I don't understand why we can't get more people involved from that point of view.
Uh, Dr. Casey, your final thoughts for the evening. Thanks as always. Appreciate
I
it. I'm
think,
glad to see you feeling better this week.
yeah, I had got COVID, and after 3 years of not having COVID, somebody brought COVID into my house, and I have been really upset about it because I had been doing good. I was running well. Who hindered me? Damn, pissed me off. So my last words is just stay COVID free. Keep people out your goddamn house because they gonna bring it to you if you ain't had it. I did good. I was running well, and then somebody came and brought it down here, and I suffered for about 3 4 days before it was, I had to shake it. Thank God
So
I shook it. The
so
chills was no joke.
so sound like your Thanksgiving was a little too close.
It wasn't Thanksgiving. It was my birthday. 40 was like, okay, we gonna
Oh,
40 coming in. We gonna come in with a bang. It came in with a bang. All right.
so you can't celebrate in your birthday suit next year. You got to keep
You
some
know
clothes
what? I
on.
should have. If I would have had my birthday suit on and stayed my ass at home like I normally do, I would have been all right. I normally stay myself in the house and just chill out. Nothing too major. It was just, it was horrible. It was great, but it was horrible at the same time. So my final thoughts, it really is about maintaining safe social distance and ensuring that even when you do maintain a safe social distance, that you are getting information that can help impact the people that are around you and taking in information. Don't let nobody play with your health. Don't let nobody play with your health, because people are not always considerate of how susceptible they may be, and but that does not stop when it comes to health issues. Even in your mind, people don't understand how mentally susceptible other people are. So when you're talking and you're moving and you're deciding to become a leader or a follower, you got to make sure that you are considering the people that are around you are affected by the information that you take in, by the things that you decide to do and the things that you don't decide to do. And at the end of the day, although I am pissed off that I got COVID, it's really about making sure that when you are encountering people, that you're giving them something good and not passing along something bad.
Brother Williams, take us home.
All right. I'm gonna finish up one statement for Dr. Casey. Now you have the antibodies, so that's the bright side of it.
And I
Okay,
still not getting vaccinated. Okay,
you got the antibodies. You don't
I
have
don't
to
need
you,
now.
you,
it.
you
You
done
don't
got
have to now.
you done got vaccinated already. You got vaccinated by fire.
All right. So my final thoughts basically would just be that I look forward to more people wanting to get involved and recognize that there is a true need just from the standpoint of what we must do as humanity to make change for the better. All we're asking is that you extend what you view to be your family values upon the neighborhood and upon others like yourself. All we need is just more people willing to do more outside of their own immediate household to make change, to make drastic change. When we as a people reach back toward collective empowerment and we have power to the people, then we will have what we need to in terms of having a position to deal with going approaching the table with power. Let's go back to recognizing the power that we have when we boycott. Let's be willing to sacrifice a few things for the greater good of all of us. It can happen, and it does happen, and history shows that it can happen. We just have to not only recognize what victories we have made, but be able to cascade further victories and not think that we overcame to a point to where we can fall back, because that is exactly the illusion that they want you to have, which is completely far from the truth. We must have collective power, and that means that we have to be willing to help each other in every way possible. And that's
Can
my
I
thought.
add to that, because you have to do it from a peer support type of aspect, and not I'm higher than you, I know more than you, or I'm better than
Thank you.
you, because
Thank
that
you.
really drives away those that you're trying to reach. You have to do it from yeah, I may have experienced more, but I'm still learning too, because we
Yes.
oftentimes think that once we've done so much that we are better, higher, or have some type of accolades of sorrow
Right.
and suffering that makes us a higher in a hierarchy over other people, versus saying no, we are still on the same level. I don't care if you
Yeah.
are 70, 80. If we still in the same community, then we're still on the same level. And even when you run out of the community, most of the times it's because you think that you've reached a certain level that you can't communicate anymore. And that's what creates a real divide. It's about learning how to be servant leaders and have a peer support based mindset, so that it's not me looking down on you trying to bring you up, but it's us walking up the stairs of success and building together.
If you're a leader, if you're currently a leader, your goal is to be a great follower. And if you're
Mhm.
currently a follower, your goal is to become a great leader.
Great leader. Well said. Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate your time as always, Dr. Casey. Appreciate your time, Brother Williams. I hope your son is doing better,
Yeah.
and look forward to talking to everyone next week.
All
All
right.
right.
See you guys
Apologies.
next